Hello, everyone. So this session is on the explosion of data, its impact on privacy, and how synthetic data can help. And I'm going to have a chat with Professor Saman Amarasinghe. Saman is a professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, as we know it. And he is a member of its Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, where he heads the commit compiler group. He was the co-leader of the RAW architecture project, and Saman is not just an academic, he's also was the founder of the Determina Corporation and a co-founder of Lanka Internet Services and the Venti Technologies Corporation. So Saman has such an impressive academic background. He received his BS in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from Cornell University and his MSEE and PhD from Stanford University. He is a graduate of Royal College Colombo and briefly attended University of Moratuwa. He is an ACM fellow. So welcome, Saman.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro.
You're most welcome. It's a pleasure to talk to you. So I actually got to know you first at the inception of the World Wide Web. So tell us a little bit about your involvement with the internet at that time.
It's sort of amazing time, isn't it? Then
Yes.
in the, I think, mid-90s. So it's interesting. I was very fortunate to be at that time at Stanford Computer Science Department. And I can still remember one of my colleagues. I was at her desk and she showed me this thing called a Mosaic browser. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. This is just it's crazy technology. And of course, it was a techie thing. It was not something many people knew. And in fact, down the corridor from my office, another colleague basically started creating a list of all the websites. At that time, there's probably 1,000 websites. And his name was Jerry Yang, and that list became Yahoo. And I was also thinking, what should I do? So I went back to my desk and created a website for me. And then I said, what can I do? And I said, let me create a website for Sri Lanka. So basically on my desktop, I created the first website for Sri Lanka. I had a couple of images and I think postcards from the tourist board. And the lab from the graphics group was right next to my office. And they had this fancy scanner. So I was able to scan those pictures. Those days scanners are not that common. So we scanned the pictures and created that. And I got to know you because the minute I put that website, bunch of other Sri Lankan students from the US said, this is really great. Let's add something. So we created a small group of people that I think for first couple of years maintain the Sri Lankan website. So that was a very interesting time. Not that people know. In fact, other part of the internet is actually Professor Gihandas, who was also a student those days. He led this effort to start email to Sri Lanka. In fact, all the email to .lk domain went from my apartment for about 2 years. So at the beginning, it was only Moratuwa, only few emails, but at the end of the time, it was a lot of emails. And then I was part of the group that actually started Lanka Internet Services. So which basically brought internet to Sri Lanka for the first time. And actually, one of the organizers of this event, Channa De Silva, I got to know him, and he cut his teeth in this business at Lanka Internet. So good old times, very different times than today.
Yes, those were pioneering days. So what would you say has changed since then?
The interesting thing is, it's, I think, very hard to explain to the current generation what it was like pre-internet. I mean, I can remember when I got into Cornell, I want to find something about Cornell. The only thing I could find was a 24-page booklet in the American Center, at the American Center. I think I read it cover to cover 100 times. That's all information you have. And today there's an information explosion. everything that we do is change. We have access to so much information. It's not just me. Like, for example, when I first came to the US, I went to the engineering library at Cornell, and I was so flabbergasted. It's probably 100 times bigger than the Moratuwa library itself. But now, last 10 years, I haven't been to a library. I have basically all the information I get is through internet. Same thing in Sri Lanka. Anywhere in the world has the exact same information. In some sense, it has democratized the information, and it has changed the way we as individuals work, but also corporations, governments, the way they function has radically changed because of this information explosion.
Absolutely. And so that is what the title of this talk, the explosion of data. So, but if we narrow it down to the business context, what would you say are the positive and negative implications of this trend for businesses?
So it's interesting what happened. I think if you again look back, a lot of time business was a very intuitive field. A good businessman was somebody who can think what will happen next and make these decisions with not that much information. What changed in business is information. Today, a good company has visibility to everything what's happening in the company. Everybody who's doing something with the company, all the accounts, all the transactions, all the sales, all the employees, full information to that. You can analyze that information, find trends, product, predict. There's so much going on with that information. So the information revolution has really changed how good businesses operate. They operate through data. So you don't have to make this kind of gut feel assumptions what should happen. It's in data. If you are good, you look at data very carefully, you analyze and you predict. It's very important. However, any good technology that comes revolutionized, the human race gets revolutionized with technology, and some humans will find ways to actually misuse it too. So one thing that has to happen with information is now you realize you personally, every time you interact with any kind of commercial entity, you are giving out information. Your addresses, your credit card numbers, what you buy, where you visit, all that information is in there. And suddenly you are losing your privacy. And what people realize is this information is very valuable, and this information can be really misused. And also, right now, what's happening is there's a little bit of a backlash and also readjustment to this free-flowing information. So even within companies, at some point, they harvested all the information, made it available to everybody, and then suddenly realized, wait a minute, that might not be the best thing. So there's an interesting thing going on. Still, the information is key. All best companies use information to maximum, but now they're also aware of things like personal information and protected personal information. There's also legislation coming out in Europe and starting in America to protect these personal informations.
So, Saman, that's very interesting. So, in this context, there is this acronym PPI, Protected Personal Information. So, what is the actual issue with sharing data with PPI?
So, the problem is there's a lot of personal information is in every company. So assume you have a bank, and every transaction somebody makes that has their names, their credit card numbers, all that information is in there. So what happens is now if that information get into some wrong hands, or some person had that a file with that information in their laptop and loses the laptop. So we have had many occasions that this information get lost and it goes bad people's hands and it gets marketed in the black market and people can misuse it. So one thing people had tried to do is, okay, why don't we just get rid of PPI information? So I assume I have all the credit card information with your name and credit card number and stuff like that, all the transactions, if you're a bank. Why can't we just get rid of the people name and the credit card information and give the rest? That seems safe. But here's the issue. If you have people's transaction information, there are a lot of implicit things that can still reveal you. So let's take a look at you're a bank, you have all your ATM transaction information, and you removed your people's names and addresses and credit card numbers. But you might have the ATM name where the ATM that person did the transaction and the time. And assume, Shani, you are on social media, you travel a lot. And if I go to social media and realize you were in London these days, you were in Nigambu some of those days, and you are in Colombo, and I can look at the data set and say, wait a minute, who made some ATM transaction from Nigambu those days, these during that period, Colombo during this period, and London in this period. And by doing that, I might be able to identify you. The problem is it might not be just the important data. There are a lot of miscellaneous data like locations, timestamps, even things like if you know a famous person bought a very expensive item, it might be in the newspaper. This person went and bought this very expensive item. And then if you look at the bank transaction and see, okay, somebody spent this much money, I might even find that person. So there are many places where even if you get rid of this data, still, if somebody get hold of that data, they can identify you. This is very worrisome to things like releasing things like medical record information, bank information, any information that has personal data can reveal things and reveal people and identify people that are in a very unexpected way. So that is the danger of records with that has personal information.
I see. So in other words, you can't just get rid of PPI data from a data set. So I guess this leads to the second part of the topic, how can synthetic data help? So what do you mean by synthetic data?
This is something we have been working on for a little while. So the idea there is, what is interesting in data for people? A lot of times what's interesting is data is there is basic statistical properties in data. How the data get distributed, what are the ranges of data, what is the statistical properties of data. Also the relations between one data or other. So for example, assume if you are somebody within the age of 20 and 30, your normal transaction size might be small. If you are between 40 and 60, it might be higher. If you are between 60 and 80, you might not do that many transactions. So there are a lot of relationships that's important. And then there are also other constraints. So for example, I have to have a bank account open before I can make a withdrawal. So I need to have an entry that says I have account open before I do a withdrawal. Or if I do a withdrawal, I need to have enough money in my account to do that withdrawal. So there are a lot of these properties that is out there. So how about instead of just having the data, extracting these properties, statistical relationships, relationships between data and constraints. So what we do is we use a lot of deep machine learning and basically extract these properties from data and build a model. The model don't have any actual data, but it says, here's the statistical distributions. Here are the relationships. Here are the constraints in this data set. Then what we do is we start sampling out of that model and create a brand new data set. So that data set will have nothing to do with you or me if original data set had you and me, but there will be this statistically, synthetically created people that has same properties as we do and distribution of people similar to distributed in the original data set. So that is what the synthetic data does. So it has nothing to do with original data, but the data that's created has both the all the statistical properties, relationships, and constraints that are in the original data set. So a lot of things you might want to do with the original data set, like doing predictions or like using a test data for your application, can be done using that synthetic data set without any loss of generality.
So that's so interesting, Saman. A very, very interesting concept about synthetic data and how you build it. So what would you say is the relevance of this to Sri Lanka in particular?
So one thing interesting is Sri Lanka is working in the global economy. And in fact, large part of Sri Lanka and what a lot of people aspire is to basically be part of that the global economy from Sri Lanka. So in my generation, we had to leave Sri Lanka to be part of the global economy. But now you don't have to. So there are a lot of companies in Sri Lanka that works with multinationals to do different things. So for example, outsourcing companies. And for them to be functional, they need to also have access to data. So assume you have a multinational company who's going to write application that process customer data for a global bank. So in order to test that application, make everything works, the the Sri Lankan company has to have access to this data. And right now, with this privacy regulation, it's getting harder and harder for these companies to give access to this data from remotely. And synthetic data can really help, because at some point you can say, I am not going to give you my customer data. There's a lot of this protected personal information, but I can create a synthetic clone of that data and give it to you. And you can use that to do most of the development, most of the analysis, what's necessary. And then once you are really ready, then we can run it on the real data set. So that globalization can be really helped by synthetic data. Especially when these new regulations comes into about. So I think that can have a big impact in a country like Sri Lanka.
Oh, perfect. Yes, of course. And this absolutely allows any company to engage increasingly with offshore entities and so on, because they can still remain GDPR compliant and all those very important compliances that they have to maintain. Excellent. So do you anticipate or see any negatives in terms of synthetic data? I know that's like I'm asking you to look into the way into the future, but as you started off, you said human beings somehow find a way to take something and
yes.
Yes, find a way. Have you kind of considered that or thought about that?
So there are some issues, because most interesting data has very long tails. So that means very rare occurrences that happen. Sometimes it might be things like happen to marginalized people, or some very rare occurrences, rare failures. One thing synthetic data try to do is find statistically significant parts. So sometimes these rare occurrences that happen once or twice might be missed in synthetic data. So we might not catch those things if you look for it, because by definition, if something is very rare, only happen to one person, if we expose in the synthetic data, you are exposing that person, because you can't hide if it is very rare. So if you are looking for rare occurrences, then it might be harder in synthetic data in there. And again, other part is, if you don't create synthetic data regularly enough, your data might get a little bit stale. You might not have the most up-to-date data. So there are issues, but I will tell you, if synthetic data becomes a big thing, the way that's going to get misused, you and I probably don't know today. Somebody's going to find out some crazy way of misusing it, and then we'll have to scratch our heads and say, oh, I didn't think about that. So the things that we think about, we can fix. But human race is a very ingenious group of people, and they're going to find ways that we never ever thought was possible.
So that's so true. Synthetic data right now is, would you say it's in still the research stages, or is it, how ready is it for, real time, big time?
It is getting to, I think, commercial stage very early on at this point. There are a few companies who are doing that, and some of the cutting edge organizations like the top banks and stuff starting to dibble their feet into this and trying to understand it. To best of my knowledge, nobody has pushed it to large production levels yet, but there are few people who are doing that. My feeling is next 2-3 years, this will become a big phenomenon, and it will caught on. And right now there are open source systems, and there's some stuff we have been developing called SDV, synthetic data vault, that basically do some of that. And so it's kind of getting from academic research to kind of open source community to corporate acceptance. I think we are in that basically path at this point.
In terms of, that's what you said in terms of starting businesses and so on, that's great. In terms of education for students in Sri Lanka, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more about what the opportunities are now with the globalization that has occurred?
So this is a very interesting question. So as I said, when I first came to United States in 1984, it was very interesting. There was a clear difference between being in University of Moratuwa and being at Cornell. Not anymore. I mean, right now, being at MIT, I have the same access, same computer, same access to information as what you are in Colombo. But recently, it has even become more democratized. Like, for example, about 10 years ago, we decided to put every MIT class online for free. There's a thing called OpenCourseWare. So if you want to take an MIT class, no, you don't have to come to MIT. You can actually get it on OpenCourseWare. In fact, it took to next step by using MOOCs, so massively online open source courses in there. So for example, MIT with Harvard and a bunch of other universities run this organization called edX. So edX was actually founded by one of my close friends, Anant Agrawal. He's now the president of edX. And if you go to edX, you can basically take any class in any subject from many top universities around the world for free. And if you pay a very small fee, like I think $10-20, you can even get a certificate. So right now, what's even happening in the US is you can come to MIT, pay $60,000. It's more than $6,000. It's very hard to get into a place like MIT and get the MIT classes. But there are a large group of people who get the exact same education by basically subscribing to these online classes. edX, there's another company called Coursera who's doing these classes. And Sri Lankan students, like I can remember after A-levels, I spent 1 year basically almost doing nothing in Sri Lanka. In fact, I actually took the American exam. That is how I came to the US. But if you find some time that you have free, this is a great thing to do. It's not just for the students. In fact, few years, actually last year, I decided that the last time I took biology was in grade 9 and 10. And the biology has changed a lot afterward because all the genomics and stuff. And I went and took a biology class that talked about genomics in edX. And I learned a lot. It was really fascinating. And I took it from a person who has a Nobel Prize in biology. Okay. And then at some point, I was also curious about China. And there was this class done by 2 Harvard professors that talked about the history of China and the culture of China. Very fascinating things. Even I learned something. And it's not like I have that much free time, but once in a while at night, I will find a few hours and take a class. I can pace it what I want. And that is what we call continuous education. I think almost everybody can benefit from things like that. There are things that are curious just for the fun, and things for your work, things for your edification, things to improve your life. These things are available. Most of them are free. And if you want a certificate for a small amount, perhaps, but you should take advantage of that. At that point, with all these things, you will be at the same level of everybody here. Not just anybody, but a student who's attending MIT or Stanford or Harvard. You can get to that level. And I think that's an amazing opportunity. And I hope more people will take advantage of these opportunities.
Excellent. So just to wrap up, and just for the interest of the audience in Sri Lanka in particular, I would like to ask you, concepts like this, which are in the academic and, research environment. What would you recommend as the methods of taking such innovations and such research and commercializing them, because this happens continuously even in Sri Lanka, and there's a little more of a gap in Sri Lanka in terms of commercializing, academic research. Any thoughts from you on how to do that successfully?
I think if you look at startups, I have been involved in multiple of them. When we started probably 20 years ago, there was a big advantage to be in Silicon Valley, be in the West. There were a lot of resources available, lot of services available. Today, it's a very global market. Everything that a startup right now in Boston has access to, you have access in Colombo, including marketing. I mean, COVID is a really great example. If I had to talk to a customer, it's through Zoom. So in Zoom, there's no difference whether you are in Boston or you are in Colombo. So I think what's missing is a mindset. Okay, I think I look at myself. When I first came to US, there was a clear difference, what I have access to what is in Sri Lanka. Not anymore. I mean, these days, if I look at my life, what I do, there's nothing. I mean, I am in front of a computer, and everything I do, I get through a computer. Once in a while, probably I will go talk to a person, but not in last year. I didn't even do that. So I have been inside a house in Boston. I might well be in Colombo. No difference at all. So why can we do this, and why it's not from Colombo? I think it's a part of mindset. I think you need to have this thing saying we can do cutting edge things. I'm not saying it's not happening. I know a bunch of people in Sri Lanka doing it, and the successful Sri Lankan companies has done it. But I think we need to get to that mindset to say that there's no difference. There's no difference. It's coming from MIT or it's coming from University of Moratuwa. There should not be difference. And if you go with that mindset and find a global audience, global collaborators, and play in that group, I think sky is the limit. I mean, we have seen a lot of things like technology like Skype came out of Eastern Europe. There are a lot of technologies that come, and in fact, part of that is also there are certain problems that are probably harder in Sri Lanka, and so if you solve them, that might have a global impact. I think Skype might be a good example because communication was much easier in US. You don't need to deal with that hard. Whereas if Eastern European countries, it was a little bit difficult. So they solved the local problem. But even though local problem was big in that country, it was a global problem for everybody. But they had the more motivation to solve it. So find problems that might be little bit more, it might be a little bit bigger in Sri Lanka than other places. And a solution might be more appreciated in Sri Lanka and other places. But a lot of those problems are actually not just local problems, global problems. And solving that might have a very interesting repercussions. I can think about many of these things that actually even in fact Sri Lankan successes, because they had to deal with local limitations, deal with cheaper systems than access to much more complicated things, and solve problems with limitations. And that made a better solution that can get to global level.
You're absolutely right, Saman, and thank you for that and reminding everybody the importance about the importance of continuous learning, because it's actually not just for the students, especially even myself, as an entrepreneur, I come from a similar background of computer science. And as an entrepreneur, I quickly realized, oh my gosh, I needed a lot of knowledge about finance and, accounting and things like that. And yeah, it was these MOOCs, as you call it, that came to my rescue. And I increasingly encourage my colleagues as well in my company to take courses in communication. All those things are very valuable to folks in Sri Lanka, because sometimes our school education does not focus too much on those aspects, and this is a wonderful way to backfill the missing gaps. So thank you so much for this discussion, Saman, taking time off from your busy schedule, and on behalf of the Sri Lanka Internet Day audience, and I hope we'll get to talk to you sometime soon again in another event.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. And Shani, thank you for hosting this. And hopefully next time we will see you in person in Colombo, in Boston.
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.